We are gathered here today to mourn the death of and to celebrate the life of Roxy Johnson. I'm Reverend Kathleen Rollens, have the privilege of serving as the interim senior minister here at Unity Church-Unitarian, where Roxy found a church home. Today, through the sharing of our stories, through our tears, and yes, our laughter, we will bring Roxy close to us once again. For a life having lived is also a life that has known family and friendships and work and all the relationships that lie between. These are just a few of the through lines of Roxy's life that we'll explore today. And after today's service, all are invited for lunch in the parish hall. And we also know there are many more stories about Roxy's life that we weren't able to include in today's service. However, we'll have a microphone available during lunch and expect and hope that you would offer more stories at that time. The poet Kahlil Gibran wrote a small book called The Prophet, and the prophet was asked to reflect on death. These words provide us with a timeless response to the realities of life and death. He wrote, "You would know the secret of death, but how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life? The owl whose night-bound eyes are blind unto the day cannot unveil the mystery of light. If you would indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide unto the body of life. For life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. In the depths of your hopes and desires lies your silent knowledge of the beyond. And like seeds dreaming beneath the snow, your heart dreams of spring. Trust the dreams, for in them is hidden the gate to eternity. For what is it to die but to stand naked in the wind and to melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered? And when you drink from the river of silence, shall you indeed sing? And when you have reached the mountaintop, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance." Unitarian Universalism has a tradition of kindling a simple flame in a chalice, and we do this to mark time as sacred, when a child is born or adopted and dedicated to the community, when our worship service begins, when a life is completed. So we light this chalice for the light of truth, a persistent companion in Roxy's life, for the warmth of community, for Roxy found community here and in many places, and for the fire of commitment, for the zeal which sparked within Roxy a calling for justice, for healing, and for hope of a better world. It is in this spirit that we light our chalice this day. Adlai Stevenson once wrote, "We are always saying goodbye to this world, always standing on the edge of loss, attempting to retrieve some meaning from the silence left behind." And at a service such as this, we recognize that something precious to us has been lost that will not be returned again, except through stories and memories and dreams and our imagination. And by the simple act of telling these stories, we begin the slow work of changing our relationship to Roxy. As Unitarian Universalists, we do not claim to know what happens to us after we die, but we do know that death itself comes to us all. This fact is what awakens us to the awareness that our lives are finite and numbered. And we also know, we know this, that each of us at some point in our lives will face grief. And there are some things we know about grief. We know there is no one way to grieve. Grief has its own time and its own rhythm. Do not judge yourselves or those around you, for we each grieve in our own way. There may be days of pure sadness and disorientation, dislocation. As author John O'Donohue wrote, sorrow knows its way better than we. And by that, he reminds us that grief does ebb and flow, ignoring sometimes our busy lives. We also know that when we lose someone we love, it brings back every other loss that we've suffered. Though each of us may need time to grieve alone or in our own ways, we also need to return to our communities of friends and family. So together we remember that life is indeed precious and fragile, and in that recognition, we hold now together a time of shared silence, knowing that silence can be a balm for a wounded and weary spirit. Amen. I'd like to invite you now, as you are willing and able, to rise and join with me in the responsive reading found in your order of service. They are not dead who leave us this great heritage of remembering joy. They still breathe in the lingering fragrance, wind-blown from their favorite flowers. They still speak in the echoes of the words we've heard them say again and again. They are not dead. Their memory is warm in our hearts, comfort in our sorrow. They are not part of us, but part of us, for love is eternal. And those we love shall be with us throughout all eternity. Please be seated.
This is the poem High Flight by John Gillespie Magee. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung, high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark nor ever eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.
The Lone Wild Bird, number 15 in the Gray Hymnal. Roxanne Gay Johnson was born on April 3rd, 1945, to Eunice, Emily, and Hiram Kenneth Johnson of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Her father owned his own heating and plumbing business, her mother a homemaker. Her mother had a flair for the dramatic arts. She was a singer and entertainer before she was married. She had two brothers, Guy, who was here with his wife Jennifer, and Kingsley, who preceded her in death. After having her children, Roxy's mother threw herself into homemaking, participating in the state fair, making the best pickles, and belonging to something called the Aqua Jesters, an all-volunteer club of clowns and the Masons. Her parents were partiers, in the best sense of the word. They had fun. So what was Roxanne like as a child? I asked her brother Guy. She was the older sister. He was her bratty younger brother. He remembers that from an early age, she was an animal lover, a love which continued all the way to the end of her life. She attended Washburn High School, graduating in 1963. She went to the University of Minnesota and received a degree in journalism. Shortly afterwards, she got a job at the Star Tribune, mostly in advertising. But it seemed that Roxy's adventuresome spirit was not satisfied with working in the advertising department. So in 1969, she went to what was then called stewardess training. She flew with Northwest Airlines her entire career, traveled all over the world. It was an exciting time. But it wasn't the easiest time to be a strong, opinionated, independent woman. There were strict rules for women stewardesses. You had to look a certain way. You had to dress a certain way, including the fact that women, that stewardesses at that time, were required to wear girdles. You remember those? Well, Roxy was a bit of a rebel, and she just hated wearing that thing. So, as the story goes, she wiggled it off one day, but didn't even have a place to put it. So she had an ingenious idea. Do you remember when those flight attendants had to wear those hats? Yeah, Roxy put the girdle under her hat. And of course, with one toss of her head, that girdle went flying. And when asked, whose is this? Roxy, feigning surprise and astonishment, said, I don't know, it's not my girdle. Although she loved being a flight attendant, it was a hard job in many ways as well. Women were also underpaid and subject to harassment. So Roxy was part of a lawsuit filed by the stewardesses against Northwest, and they won. That settlement allowed Roxy to buy the house that she adored at 1857 Ford Parkway, and that was to be her home for the rest of her life. Roxy's career, of course, did not end with the lawsuit. She turned her considerable writing talents to help write grants, particularly for small, family-owned businesses that were run by women. And she worked for the American Lung Association, and for 9 years, she and Juliet Mitchell worked as an etiquette trainer in the Dakota County Jail, teaching life skills to the inmates. She and Juliet were not only collaborators, but were as close as you could be. Roxy wasn't a cook. Juliet said she got Juliet interested in America's test kitchen, and Juliet would cook for her. Pretty neat trick. She and Juliet and her family would spend holidays together, and Roxy would whip up her famous Cool Whip and marshmallow dish. Always a memorable treat. But don't take my word for it. Juliet Mitchell would like to share a story from her time with Roxy. Juliet.
Thank you, Kathleen. Roxy became more than a friend and business associate to me. In many ways, we were like sisters because she was the eldest sister, and even when I was past 50, she would call me kiddo, and I would answer to it. When Roxy and I worked together at Dakota County Jail, we usually would start the group together, introduce ourselves to the guys. One time she had to start without me, so she told the participants about me and that we were like sisters separated at birth. The next day, I went in without Roxy. The guys were looking at me rather strangely. I'm going like, what's going on here, right? They said that Roxy told them that this woman that was coming were like sisters separated at birth. I responded, that would be me. And everybody just laughed. We just got a really good laugh out of that. That moment set the tone for the most successful group that we've ever had in that facility. So there's nothing like bonding over laughter. And if you know Roxy, we laughed a lot. Thank you.
Roxy had many loves and passions, but there were 3 areas that came up in our conversations: her volunteer work, her neighborhood, and this church. Roxy was a fixture in the neighborhood. She could be seen walking her 3 Shih Tzus. She loved animals, as you heard, particularly her dogs. She loved nature, although not all of nature. She was constantly on edge about the weather. One of her friends said she was weather paranoid, always watching the horizon for an oncoming storm. And, you know, she had good reason to be worried. One big storm took down a tree near her house, And she literally could not get out of the house. I'm told that the alto section of Unity Church had to come by with a chainsaw to get the tree removed so that Roxy could get out of her house. Yay, altos. But still, she loved the outdoors and nature. And please don't call her when the PBS Nature Show was on, because she wouldn't answer the phone. She was a tree hugger before people even knew what that was. She's passionate about her home and her neighborhood and her animals. And so to tell us a little bit about that passion and the neighborhood is her friend and neighbor, Joanne Collins.
It's a pleasure and an honor for me to talk about Roxy, my next-door neighbor and friend of 35 years. This summer will be quiet in our neighborhood. For the first time, we will miss the cacophony of our dogs barking, and I'm saying our dogs barking in addition to some of the other neighborhood dogs, signaling that Roxy is walking Pippin, or before him Pee-wee, or before him Tigger, and before him Pepsi. She would stop and have a conversation and engage with anyone along her path. But we worried about Roxy over these past couple of years because she was walking a little slower and with a little less vigor. Roxy was the guardian of nature in our neighborhood. Whether it was rescuing a mother duck, Elizabeth, and her ducklings, taking an injured hawk to the U of M Raptor Center, or driving a flatbed from downtown Minneapolis when Target Center was doing some remodeling and they were going to pull out all of these young maples. She drove them back to our neighborhood on this flatbed, and she gave the construction workers a case of beer apiece for loading them up for her. And then we enlisted the neighbor boys to plant them. She was persistent, as anyone who knows Roxy will agree, and she made a difference in our neighborhood, and it's evidenced by the mature maples that line our block today. She was a true intellectual, and she loved to have a good discussion, many of which took place in my living room over a cup of coffee and cookies with Stacy and me. She engaged with us, and she cared deeply about every family in our neighborhood. And shortly before her passing, she told me that she was thinking about each family and how she just wished for happiness for every member of our neighborhood. But I cannot fail to mention that Roxy did love a good celebration, and especially if cake was served. Oh, Roxy, we will miss you dearly.
And she was passionate about Unity Church. Although she never joined the church as a member, she was a very regular member of Unity Choir, and it was there where she met Karen Buggs and Kathleen Bartholomew and Carolyn Caswell. And each one of these women could have many stories to tell about Roxy because of their long relationship with her, one that was characterized by friendship and laughter and shared tasks and joy. So I'm going to invite them each in turn, Karen and then Kathleen and Carolyn, to share a memory and a story about Roxy with you. Karen.
Good morning. I'm Karen, and Roxy and I were friends for over 40 years, and oh, how I miss her. But here's something we did during the COVID time, which I thought was pretty creative. We decided that we loved ice cream, especially the Culver's concrete mixers. So I would clip coupons out of the paper, and I'd call her up and say, "Rox, I've got some coupons, let's go." So we each drive our cars to Culver's on University Avenue. We would go through the drive-through, hand in our coupons, get our individual concrete mixers, and then we go park the cars in their parking lot. We'd roll down our windows. This is our COVID consciousness. Roll down the windows, take down our masks then, and chat and eat and laugh and laugh. I'll miss her. Thank you.
I'm so grateful to be here to celebrate Roxy. I've known Roxy since I first began my tenure as choir accompanist here at Unity about 25 years ago. I think it was 1998. Roxy happened to be between my age and my mother's age, and because of kind of struggles that I had with my relationship with my mother, I've always especially been touched and warmed by Roxy's support and sense of unconditional love toward me. She's always keenly interested in what I was doing, appreciative, impressed, encouraging, bolstering. This was true when I studied homeopathy for 4 years and studied music therapy for 3 years. And when I studied music therapy, she would come over and be part of some of my assignments that I had to recruit people. When I was taking improv classes in acting, how taken aback she was at my curiosity and willingness to do such a thing, and she came to watch me perform. She often praised my talents and accomplishments, whether it was something I made in the kitchen and shared with her or my piano playing. A constant support to me, she never failed to make me feel so admired and appreciated, something that will always be with me. Roxy was instrumental, no pun intended, in hiring me to provide piano music for her dear friend's memorial service 6 years ago here at Unity. It was at that memorial service that I met my friend, Philip Rickey. And Philip has referred to Roxy as the wing woman in our relationship. Eventually, Philip hired Roxy to assist him at his home on a weekly basis for the past 4 years, making order out of his business paperwork related to his father, George Rickey's legacy, and other voluminous belongings in his large Victorian home. They shared many stories and laughter amid their work together. At times, when they were discussing something related to their work together and Roxy had an unrelated thought or story to tell, she would suddenly cock her head sideways and say, "Squirrel!" Whereupon she would delve into her unrelated thought. That was her cue to him. Others have witnessed this also. Roxy, the memory of your presence, your humor, your grace, elegance, and unconditional love will never be forgotten.
Roxy was part of our Movie Mavens group. There are 4 of us, me, Carolyn Caswell, Karen Buggs, Sylvia Elrod, and Roxy, started watching movies together after the COVID lockdown starting in June of 2020. We were single women, living alone, all starved for real-life people contact, especially since Unity Choir had stopped. And we all liked movies. So we gathered at my house in Maple Grove every 2 to 4 weeks with my big screen TV and took turns picking movies and lunch menus. We were careful to wear masks, sit 6 feet from each other, and we got vaccinated once that was available. Our first movie was Hamilton, which we liked so much we watched twice. Roxy always picked her favorite comfy chair along with her favorite fuzzy red blanket, since it tended to be cool in my family room. She didn't like violence, so she turned away sometimes during Lord of the Rings, but she really liked the costumes and the scenery and the documentaries about the costume design. Roxy loved almost anything we had for lunch, especially Leanne Chin's party packs. Often during lunch discussions, Roxy would say her famous "squirrel," like Kathleen mentioned. I think Roxy got it from the movie Up, said by Doug the talking dog. We all enjoyed that movie, even though it was bittersweet. We had to stop our movie mavens meetings last September when Roxy started falling more frequently and broke her wrist. And then she was in and out of the hospital more and more. But for 2.5 years during COVID, Roxy kept us all laughing.
Many people worry that if they don't have biological children, then they will be all alone at the end of their lives, with no one to care about or for them. Roxy did not have children. In fact, she was briefly married in her 30s, but the rest of her life was spent as a single woman. And yet, she was not alone. She cultivated deep and rich friendships, so much so that towards the last 6 months of her life, she was cared for by these women and other dear friends and family in her orbit. It is no small thing to tell a dear friend when they are in decline, to find appropriate health care and providers for them, to take them into your home and to bathe them with love and care when they die. But this is what happened with Roxy. She was sung to by Unity Choir's threshold singers. She was surrounded by those who knew and loved her, and she took her last breath in the presence of such great love and care. So what does this say about Roxy Johnson's life? It speaks volumes of the kind of person she was, the kind of love she engendered, and the legacy that she left. We shall all be grateful for having known her and will miss her, but her life and her love will continue long after these words have been spoken. One of the traditions at Unity Church is to offer something called a collage of voices. And these are written reflections sent in for this service to be read aloud. And I have a few to share with you now. The first is from Unity member Ann Mabbitt. She writes, "One of my memories of Roxy was from when I moved to Minnesota from Maine and promptly joined Unity Choir. The choir was not as socially supportive then as it is now, but Roxy was the choir member who made me feel most welcome." And from her friend, Bobbin, "Roxy and I have been dear friends since we met in NWA as in flight attendant training in 1969. We always found something to laugh about in every situation we shared. In 2020, Roxy visited us in Texas. We went to the Fort Worth stockyard, and Roxy decided to get her picture taken on a longhorn steer. Not an easy feat. As usual, we laughed hysterically as it took several attempts and a push from a cowboy to get her on the steer. Typical Roxy, she did not give up until she finally mounted the steer and got her picture taken. I will miss my dear friend, but I will think of her laughing and singing with the angels in heaven surrounded by her beloved pets. Love, Bobbin." This is from Roxy's friend Mike Foley in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. "I'm going to miss Roxy. More than a year out of college and running out of options on how to score my first job in advertising, I made my way to a dark building where a woman, who turned out to be Roxy, answered my questions about a mysterious blind advertisement that led me to her office at the American Lung Association. She paged through my portfolio with interest and energy. I suddenly had the feeling this intriguing professional was about to offer me my first job, which she did, telling me, "Unfortunately, this is an unpaid internship." But before I could be disappointed, she explained, "At this point in your career, it's better to work and not be paid than to not work and not be paid." Amazingly, I believed her. I trusted her. I admired her. She said she'd help me put together a stronger portfolio and assured me the experience would help me land my first paid job as a writer. And within 6 months, it turned out to be true. Roxy helped launch my career, and I will forever be grateful for her kindness and grace and leadership. And while I would say goodbye to the Lung Association, I never said goodbye to Roxy. A best friend for nearly 40 years, there are no words to describe how much it hurts to say goodbye now. Godspeed, Roxy. I'll see you in the stars. And this from Carol Sandburg. My dear cousin and I built a close friendship over the last 14 months that became so precious to me that her passing left a Roxy-shaped hole in my heart. Her references to the sacred mystery of life underscored her spirituality, and she maintained a reverence for all creatures on this planet, carrying no biases against the unknown. In conversation with my cousin, I felt free to be totally transparent, not risking judgment of any kind. And I watched her extend this courtesy as willingly to strangers as to her friends and family. In 1990, during a Minneapolis visit, I experienced her enthusiasm for the unique and unusual when she took my children and me to a loft apartment that contained an antique camera collection. Immersed in the treasures we were gazing upon, our visit was abbreviated by Roxy announcing, "Time's up." On we went to the next adventure. Her enthusiasm for art, culture, music, nature, and ideas often prompted her to exclaim, "Interesting." True to Roxy's spirit, the interruption of adventure with her feels abrupt to me. Yet I am comforted in knowing that there is a divine adventure for her to follow. Time's up. We have heard about Roxy's warmth, her caring, her commitment, her friendships. These were hers to own, but now they are ours as well. If you have been inspired by her willingness to be a loving and loyal friend, go and do likewise. If you have been the recipient of her love and attention, may you bring forth that love and attention within yourself, and in so doing, make the world a kinder, friendlier, more just and loving place. And if you do these things, then you will indeed make of Roxy's memory a living testament to the person she was and to the life she lived. Our benediction are the words from the poet Mary Oliver, who says, "To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go." Rest well, Roxy, in the love we bear you.